All right.
All right, share screen.
So we're going to show you the PowerPoint. So those of you that really hang on that PowerPoint, rely on it, none of y'all might, but if some of you do, kind of look at it, and then we're going to pull it off and then just talk. We're going to talk the PowerPoint, but you won't really see it. But we're going to start out apparently with it.
Yes.
That's so bad.
All right, so welcome to our week 6. We are covering joy, which will be super happy experience for everybody, I know. But just a quick review of what we're doing here. Oh, I need to click down here so that the PowerPoint actually works. There it is. Our class review, so we're going to try and keep it limited to 20 minutes of talking about understanding the emotion, understanding what joy is and how it works, and then talking about for about 20 minutes in hearing God's emotion. We want to hear what God says about this emotion, joy, and how to use it, how we can use that in relating to God, but also how we can use it in relating with other people. And then spend about 20 minutes discussing. We have never made it 20 minutes. So Susan and our miniature goal is to at least give 10 minutes, maybe. That would be a better, at least closer within the hour instead of right on the hour.
Yeah, I think we can do it.
So first of all, any fear experiences in the past week for people to share that they wanted to talk about? Fantastic. So we're going to go ahead.
It was with fear and with joy. So
Okay.
we had planned a visit to the mothers in Palestine and Mart, but to be a surprise and to practice social distancing. And that definition was a little bit different from our pre-med son, who wasn't going on the trip but had lots of directions about what we should do and not do, and he was giving those when we were trying to have the 4 sons, Jan and I's little Mother's Day thing in Adam's house, because Adam had surgery on Friday and has been for his knee, and he was recovering at his house. So we're having this mini thing, but half of the present opening was being directed by those 2 sons that weren't going, what we were to do when we went. And so I hadn't been very fearful about, our parents catching COVID and dying, but coming out of that house, that was, where they were going.
That's literally what they said.
Oh, yes. So we just, I said, we planned this. They're going to have so much joy. We will just be safe. I've talked to 2 medical people. They said, if you're do this stuff. So anyway, we went, and the hardest part was the arrival. We've never been to their house and not hugged them when we arrived, and we never left their house and not hugged them when we left. So those were the 2 hardest points where we didn't have to, physically restrain the grandmothers, but we had to put a hands up. I had to say, according to Caleb, we can't do this. So I gave him the bad rap, and they listened, except that the last one grandmother said, well, what Caleb doesn't know what hurt him. But we didn't have to roll that window up on her hand, but we almost did as we were leaving. So it worked out, but there was a little bit of real fear in order to have that joy. And we think that we did it safely.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to pray before we start here and getting into joy. So thank you all. Heavenly Father, we just ask that that we can be in your presence, Lord. That in your presence, we find the fullness of joy. And we just want to know that fullness. We want to be filled with joy as we talk about it, understand it, and start to use it in a better way, Lord, to actually give you credit so that we can rejoice knowing you. In your name, amen.
Amen.
Yeah.
All right, back to...
So we're going to get tired of this or not be good at it, either one.
Right.
So we created, did it work?
Yes.
Is it on there? A discussion 1. So this is our gallery view discussion 1. We're going to start off discussing and talking about, or trying to talk about something. When you think of joy in the Bible, what Bible experience comes to mind? So anybody, you can just take your time, say, I'm going to think about it for a minute. We're going to see kind of what we come up with, because this is what we did. And it's interesting as to what we realized. So when you just think of someone in the Bible, and I always call them experiences because I don't want to call them a story because people think maybe that's not real. But any of the experiences in the Bible that you read about certain people, and you think, wow, they were joyful. Like just right off the top of your head, anything come to mind?
David.
There was the whole, there was the whole Elizabeth and Mary's coming together and
Yeah.
both they were pregnant.
Yes.
Right.
I didn't think, go ahead.
Those are the first two that I thought of too, but the next one I thought of is, you remember that song, they went jumping and leaping and praising God. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. Was it Paul? Was it, it wasn't Paul.
Peter and John.
Peter and John.
Peter and John went to pray. They met a lame man on the way.
Mhm.
He asked for alms, his palms, and this is what Peter did say. Yeah. Sorry, that's the story I'm thinking of.
We did that song a lot with our kids, but what Jan and I think immediately think of is when Sarah and Abraham find out that they're expecting their first child, because we experienced that joy. It was incredible. So it was pretty, that was our closest one.
Yeah.
And then the father of the prodigal son is the one that I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Good
Oh,
one.
very good.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. We'll hear about that one a little bit later. Those are all good.
Yeah.
The man from
I had
Ethiopia.
The man from Ethiopia? I don't know that one.
That Philip met on the road, and
He went on his way.
he went
rejoicing.
on his way rejoicing. The Bible specifically says that.
Okay.
Yeah, and then he went on to supposedly be, you would think, more of a missionary in that area. Is that right? I'm trying to connect it. Anyway.
Could be.
Probably
It's-
not.
He went back to
Traditionally,
Queen Candace and he went back to Ethiopia, and there's a group of Christians. They were first, they can be traced back to that, is what I've always been told. I haven't researched to make sure, but always sounded good to me. Sounded like made sense.
Yeah.
All right, those are good. Wow. I had two just in case. I just kind of took the two that came off the top of my head, and that was David singing and dancing. And then I had Miriam at the end of when the Red Sea closed, and then she started singing, and all the women started singing and dancing because the Romans were taken away.
The Egyptians.
I said Romans. Probably Egyptians. I had the wrong thing in my notes. Okay, anyway, they wouldn't have known that if you wouldn't have said anything.
I just noticed it. I was like,
All right. But what I kind of wanted to say, you can go ahead and move back to it. But when I think of going to the Bible, like when I was younger and I just felt lost and I needed to figure something out, what I was usually looking up is when I was depressed about something or when I was sad about something, and I go to the back of the book in the index and I'm like, look up depressed. And so I'd look that up and look up verses to kind of guide me and figure out what to do with that and why am I depressed? How do I deal with being depressed? Other things are when I'm confused, and also non-feeling things, not talking about feelings, but just other things you're working through. And so you look that up in the Bible to kind of get guidance. I have never looked up joy in the Bible and tried to figure out what to do with it. Has anyone else done that? Like, where I am joyful. I'm so nervous about this.
how do I fix my joy?
How do I fix my joy? So that's kind of what I was going through when we were talking about a Bible experience for like thinking about joy. But I'm like, usually you're not looking for that. You're looking more when you're having a hard time. So, but those were great examples.
Yes. Well, we're starting off with the title here, Joy is Difficult. Because honestly, when I was creating the feeling grid, I had a really difficult time trying to find the words to fit appropriately. It troubled me because I couldn't really find these words that fit well, and they couldn't go into the places I really needed. It isn't that there are not a lot of words that we use to talk about happiness and joy, those certainly exist. But the problem really is how to distinguish between the differences between happy, delighted, glad, elated, chipper, cheerful, wonderful, right? Those are all wonderful words. But like, oh gosh, you know, was I glad or was I cheerful? I'm not real sure. Like, we don't really have an ability to distinguish between those positive synonyms and words that we have. We can tell the difference between despair and sad. We can tell the difference between a lot of those types of emotions and on the sad side of things, but we really struggle to differentiate. Excuse me. We don't spend our time trying to dissect these joyful feelings. We just have them. And then when we have joy, we just, you know, hey, we appreciate it. And that's what it is. But the goal for most of us is probably joy, right? We spend our time trying to avoid sadness and we seek joy, yet we don't have the ability to recognize its nuances. So it's kind of like there's this goal in front of us that we're wanting to get there, but sometimes we barely know when we're even there. I know sometimes we focus a lot on the bad, right? That's what I do. I tend to notice the bad first, and I struggle sometimes to input my joy, but I give credit for things. I'm the one that messes up, and then I give credit for good things to other people or circumstance or situation. But we have this expectation that joy shouldn't be this something that we experience once and then it's gone. It should be something that we experience all of the time. So the idea that we're joyful, sometimes we even go, oh gosh, why even get happy? I mean, it's the other shoe's gonna drop, whatever that means. What if you have flip-flops on? So what if you're barefooted? You know, I don't know, or maybe you shake the dust from your sandals. But we get caught up in this part. Many of you, maybe you've seen the movie Inside Out. It was a great Pixar, Disney movie talking about emotions that are inside this young 14, 15-year-old girl. And one of the primary characters is a character named Joy. She's the primary emotion and lead character with sadness. And Joy tends to believe that the only acceptable emotion for anyone at all times is joy. She should be running the show. She has to be running the show. But how realistic is that? How realistic is it that we can be joyful all of the time and expressing all of those things? It's difficult. The truth is, just like other emotions, sadness, fear, and anger, and joy, and peace, and power, those things are fleeting. They're constantly in flux. And so as we begin to talk about these positive sides of emotions, we have to realize joy isn't something that we're trying to achieve permanently. That comes in heaven. That's going to happen. But right now, what we're working on in this place is working toward joy and understanding how to use it, how to communicate it. I should make that one go back. Can we have joy all the time? No. It seems like that is where our pursuit is, yet we also tend to quash our joy, right? I know that I have a tendency that I don't want to upset other people by telling them my joy, right? Maybe they're just having a bad day. And if I go and tell them how joyful I am, that's just going to make things worse, because that's how joy works, right? It makes things worse. There's a hesitancy to share and express our joy with others. It is like this will overpower them into despair because they are not at the same level of joy that we have. We are seeking some kind of equilibrium of joy before it could ever be expressed. We call that sympathy, right? And forgetting that people can be empathic to our joy. They can be in their own place and separate from us, and then recognize our joy and be excited for it. But if they are down, wouldn't upsetting their sadness create joy? right? So upsetting others with our joy versus upsetting others' sadness. Well, that's the same thing. And yes, I used upset twice because that's the thing, right? Upset is just like, we're going to flip it over. So if they're sad and we sell our joy and we upset their sadness, that's what we want to do. We want to upset their sadness. We want to bring joy because that's what empathy is. And remember, if they're feeling sad, they can be comforted because we will then know their sadness, and then joy is on the other side. This is exactly what people need from us. This is our discussion question 2.
So what do y'all think with, I mean, everybody says laughter is contagious, right? I just kind of thought about that, and it is. But when we're really upset or when we're sad, when we're not doing well, I don't know if it just, for me, it depends. So we're just kind of asking y'all, what do you think about joy and sharing joy? And does it bring more joy? Or do you you see someone, not doing it? Like, I know in our lobby, when I'd go out, when I first used to when I didn't see clients and I go out to the lobby, I'd always kind of be like, okay, there are people here seeing Brian and other people, so they must not be doing okay, they must be sad. So I better not be too joyful when I walk through.
And misery loves company, right?
Yeah,
So,
but wait a minute. No, that's silly. I was just trying to think of them and not make them be too happy or, have too much cordial, oh, it's so good to see you. How are you? And it's like, well, apparently not. Well, no, people go to counseling who are okay. They just need to talk to somebody about other things too. And why not have a joyful lobby when they come in? It gives them a positive place to come to. So it's kind of silly that I thought that much about it, looking back on it. But why not be joyful? What do y'all think?
Well, I think
just
if you spend just a few minutes with Kelly's dad, you know joy pretty quick. I mean, in other words, he's always, no matter how blue you might be, he always had a joyful approach at the beginning of any conversation that I ever was in with him. I mean, in other words, and that would just help you to
that was
catch
good.
joy. It was infectious. And
Yeah.
Gary Cross, I think, is that way. I mean, I can just think of several of our brethren that, and Miss Betty Perkins, so I think it is a gift. It's a gift of the Spirit. I know it's a gift of the Spirit. And when it's flowing through people, it is powerful.
Right. Well, and there's also a question of and we're going to get into more of this, but being joyful doesn't have to be outwardly bubbly.
Yeah.
So
you all should not go hugging everybody.
well, you can't.
That would be
but,
awkward.
Yeah, like Barney is sad.
Yeah.
Barney cannot hug anybody.
So,
There's someone else who hugged Barney. Anyway, so I think joy is also can be presented differently through different people and different personalities. But I just think it's interesting that we were talking about how sometimes you just hold off on your joy or hold off on being super happy in front of people when but why not? We're supposed to share that more. I think we share sadness a lot in a way that we probably don't need to, but.
I have a thought. Proverbs says a joyful heart is good medicine, and I think it's medicine for the person who has a joyful heart, and it's medicine for the person who encounters the person who's joyful. And I think this goes back to how you were mentioning chipper and all those different words before that are kind of synonyms, but they're really not the same thing as joy. Joy is I apparently got kids songs on my heart tonight because I'm thinking got joy, joy, joy down in my heart.
Yeah.
So I can have a moment of happiness, but I don't have true joy. And you can have people who are people of true spirit-led, spirit-instilled joy who might not be happy all the time. I mean, those are different things. And I guess I don't even know how to explain them really, except sometimes you know it when you see it. But I was thinking I watched Kristen Taylor do her talk at Oak Hills. She's Becky and Don Russell's daughter, whose daughter has been sick for many, many years with really, really bad illnesses. And she emanates joy and has chosen a life of joy, even though their circumstances are often very, very rough. So I don't know, those are just some random thoughts about it. But I think sharing joy is great. I think sometimes people sharing, I don't know, sometimes it can get a little bit, you have to be a little selective. And when you share, you know, like in your lobby, sharing joy is one thing, but sharing my life is perfect, I'm so great, everything is wonderful, when you're around a bunch of people who aren't in that situation right then, sometimes that has to be more selective. But I think that just the joy that comes from your heart is great all the time.
Yes, and you actually hit on what we're about to talk about, Melina, and I use the comparison between joy and happy. So we're gonna step into our emotional terminology. We should have like a little music behind emotional terminology because we added it to every single one because we like it. So I can't read what it says up there because everyone's in the way.
Joy.
So joy, we're just going to talk about joy as your emotional terminology. And what I compare is joy versus happy. And I usually will, I ask clients this, and it's always fun to kind of hear them kind of sit and go, okay, let me think about that. And just across the board, I don't have a lot of Christian clients. I think I have one. And, but I still ask this, and you still kind of get this similar response because the word spirituality comes up. Like it's a spiritualness to joy versus happy, which is a little bit different. And even Christian, non-Christian, different faiths, like everybody usually kind of describes them in those two different ways. It's something internal.
Like the song, joy in your heart, right? Joy in your soul. So
Yeah.
think about it, to truly understand joy, we believe it's spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Spiritual, when you sang that song, I heard you say joy, joy, joy down in my heart. It's not like out, it's down in my heart. So that's deep. And that's something that is going to be stronger and hold longer. Like we were talking about earlier, like we're supposed to be joyful all the time. Maybe we're just not supposed to be bubbly joyful all the time, or just outwardly joyful all the time. And it's maybe a strength. It's like an inner strength that I kind of like to think about it. So you can click on what's next. So maybe thinking vertical versus horizontal. I think about it that way, godly versus worldly. And there's nothing wrong with either of them, not the one's godly, one's worldly, but the joy to us, the way we talk about it is it's an inner strength that you're working towards having. And so it takes longer, it takes more work to get joy, but it can sustain, and it can sustain through loneliness. And I asked a client one time, I go, can you have joy and be lonely at the same time? And we both just kind of sat there, we kind of thought it through. Can you be lonely and happy at the same time? I mean, not much. For me, I always describe happy as, I think I've told this story before, so if I did, I apologize, but
I'm not going to make our 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll be quick. I love cake. Like cake makes me happy, right? You go to a birthday party, they have cake, you're happy. I don't really like birthday parties when I was little, so my mom's like, there's cake. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go. They have cake. I love cake.
Cake doesn't feed your soul?
Cake does not feed my soul, because when I show up and there's no cake at the party, I'm not happy anymore. And I remember one birthday party, I was like, you have got to be kidding me. And I had to stay for a very long time, get my face painted, sit with a big stuffed bunny. And I'm like, there's no cake for all of this work I'm doing. And that happy is fleeting. But the joy that I had from actually spending time with friends and being and connecting is joy. So there is a difference between them. So one's more in depth, and one is a little bit more easy to achieve yet fleeting. So go ahead. So joy, the emotion evoked by well-being, success, or good fortune. You know how we love to look stuff up in the dictionary and then show it to you and go, but we don't like this at all. I don't like this one at all. Mm-mm. And so it didn't sit well with me. So I searched and kind of went different ways and trying to figure out what to do with it. And I was like, well, this definition hit me completely wrong. I didn't like it at first, but the word seems so horizontal, right? But what do we have to replace it? So go ahead. What did I say next? Oh,
Well,
so
we're running out of time.
so what we've already done the discussion, so
Okay.
we don't have to do that. So we're going to go into the feeling grid because we're speeding up on this process. And that was your emotional terminology between joy and happy. And actually, Melanie, you did a great job of doing it for us before we even got there. So thank you. All right. So feeling grid.
Okay, so look at, here we go. Watch this.
Okay.
What?
What?
That
That didn't work.
didn't work.
I don't know what you're going to try.
I'm gonna do that and then go backwards. And then I'm gonna do this. Oh, look at that. Okay, so we've got my laser pointer here for the feeling grid. We have joyful is our basic feeling. Our second tier are these internal emotions. We've got excited, grateful, cheerful, happy, hopeful, and free. I think that these embody some differences between where we can really see some separation between them. I think happy and cheerful have some similarity, but remember these also, there is some overlap as it is a spectrum of emotion. And then we have these others beyond. So again, when I created the feeling grid, I had to really start with the opposite. So I started with the sad and I just looked up antonyms for some of these feelings and tried to find the ones that best fit and worked pretty well. So a couple of things to point out, which Kelly and Sarah have pointed out, the fruits of the Spirit. So we've got joyful here is our main fruit of the Spirit, which is an opposite of sadness. And that's an important part as we're talking about joy being something that is spiritual, because it is a fruit of the Spirit. It's deeper, it's bigger than happy, and happy is the second tier. Susan's going to talk about here in just a moment, but we've got the word pleased as a part of happy, right? This is, in some Bibles, it says when God created, he looked on his creation and saw that it was good, or that he was pleased. So this is our first emotion. Actually, the Hebrew word, we're not going to talk about it in depth, but the Hebrew word for good or unspeakable joy is the same here as pleased. So when they say good, they're talking about joy. And then that's connected to happy and joyful. So pleased as God was is also him expressing his joy. I love the idea that hopeful is connected to joy, right? That hope is something, and the only thing we can hope for is what we know. And what we know is that the battle's been won. And that's the only thing we can really truly hope for successfully, right? I can, as I've made fun of myself here, that I can hope that the Red Raiders are going to have a decent football team this season, but right, that hope might be fruitless. There's nothing I can depend upon in that hope. But the thing I can, there's always, and First Peter says it, I believe, that hope is our anchor, right? It keeps us solid. Hope is joy. The other thing is that hope is the opposite of shame. So if you look on the feeling grid, you'll see on the opposite side under sadness that we have shame. Shame is that internal, the experience of how others might feel, but hope is an external experience that we're having on some external thing going well and right. So I love that experience there. Susan brought up this great word because I could not find an opposite for guilt. And so she said, how about free? So free is a great way to think about how we can feel. Feeling free, when we are not feeling guilty, we are not feeling burdened. We are not feeling weighted down. And that freedom, I think, affects our souls. My other favorite word in here is fervent. The first definition for it is burning hot. So this is basically an expression of like super passionate emotion. And the opposite of this is from excited is apathetic, right? So numb or indifferent. So indifferent, I don't think so. We're glowing hot over here with emotion, glowing hot. And that is deep inside us. Again, I think that connects great with joy. Any quick questions about the feeling grid or joy, or what joy really is? before we move into how to use joy? Hearing God's emotions.
I wonder if, I kind of wonder with how we've talked about joy, if and Brian, you can tell me what you think, the words on the outer two columns, when we have joy, that deeper inner kind of spirituality, all of those other words can become more, I can't think of the word, like you feel them more.
Right.
And when you don't have, the lower your joy is, of course, the less these are, but you can still have happy, you can be cheerful, you can feel hopeful, but if you've got that inner joy, I wonder if all of them are just even better, like more colorful.
Right.
So that's what I was thinking.
Oops. Here we go.
I was just going to, I really am connecting with your comparison of guilt and free. And when we think about our worship assemblies or whatever, sometimes we approach God from the standpoint of guilt or I've got to do this, or God's not going to like me. And when we talk about free, it's no guilt. And so I've never really thought of this as being opposite, but freedom in worship, or being able to approach God in freedom, as being opposite of guilt. I'd like to think about that a lot more. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's really good. The other thing I was going to say is that this week I just happened to start listening to a new podcast. It's called The Happiness Lab. And I don't know if anybody else has ever listened to it or not, but it's really a pretty interesting podcast. But they're talking about all the things that we think would make us happy, but really don't. And as I was listening to it, I've listened to the first 2 or 3. I'm realizing that they're talking about joy. Really, they're not talking about happiness, because it's so much broader. They keep having to re-explain, and so I think that's something that you're pointing out really, really clearly, and it's resonating with me. So appreciate that.
Can I interject something?
Yes.
So as I've kind of struggled with this concept of joy in myself, I came across a definition from Kay Warren one time that I think kind of solidifies this better for me, so my understanding, because I don't think that joy can be based upon external circumstances. I think it has to be deeper. So her definition is joy is the settled assurance that God is in control of all the details of my life. The quiet confidence that ultimately everything is going to be all right, and the determined choice to praise God in all things. So I guess for me, like joy is almost a choice that I have to make. And it can't be based on whatever externally is happening. It has to be based on, I'm trusting God has got control of this. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but that's kind of where I resonate on that.
That was beautiful. That was, that was actually really, I like, because we didn't bring specifically spirituality into the definition, but we were talking about it as being a spirituality, but you brought it right into the definition. I like how she described it. That was neat.
Can I throw one more comment in there? Sorry. I know.
Please, no.
Well, I was just looking at the grid once again, and just I love it. And there's so many verses, right? We could probably spend some time on that, but how you had joy, and if I remember, one of those, the second tier, one of them was hope, right? And then you had some other ones that were there, and I had multiple thoughts. One is, can I be excited and hopeful or only experience one at a time, 2 or 3, or do I have to experience all of them? So I had all these thoughts initially, but when I'm joyful, I wonder if hopeful from a spiritual perspective is constant. So I mean, that's one thing that I just wondered, because it goes to even the definition of what we just heard is assured. Is tier 3. So I love that connection there.
Right. If you take the definition of joyful that was just given, and I know you all don't have it in front of, maybe you have your grid in front of you, but if you think about the second tier of sadness, so starting from the top, we've got apathetic, then hurt, then lonely, then depressed, then ashamed and guilty. And her definition that she read was basically the opposite of all of those things. It is not feeling guilty, not feeling ashamed, feeling happy, feeling cheerful, not lonely at all because God is with you, not feeling hurt, so you're grateful and fortunate and appreciative and excited about what's going to happen. And it is that choice. I agree completely.
Yeah, I think the deeper joy you have, the actual deeper spiritual joy you have, the more of these to the left, Sean, like I think you were saying, can you have many of them at the same time? It's almost like they all start, getting dinged and they're on because your joy bank is getting full, probably because your spirituality is growing, maybe.
Right.
So, Kevin? I can't hear you, Kevin.
I've been thinking in the back of my mind through the whole class, but the phone only person who I'd love to know their name if they want to share, because that was an awesome comment.
Yeah. Is it Kay?
Who
No,
is-
sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, if they don't want to share, I understand. It was just an awesome comment, but it just led
No,
me.
it's Becca, Ray. It's Becca.
Yeah, awesome. I knew that voice, but I couldn't just put my finger on it. So great comment, Becca. And were you thinking about Philippians and Philippians 4 and that idea of contentment that Paul talks about in all circumstances? Because he was in prison when he wrote that, and that was in the middle of it, the darkest hour. They sang praises, and that joy changed, everyone's life, but particularly the jailer and his family.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And nourishment.
Oh, no, I think that's an amazing connection. I don't know that I had actually even thought about it. It's just something I struggle with because I know I should be joyful, and sometimes I don't feel it, and I think I have to choose it and choose to trust and have those things. So that's kind of where I have grappled with this and struggled with it, because I know I need to be joyful. I know I should be joyful, but that's not often where I find myself landing. So then I have to remember it's a choice to trust that God's in control and he's got this. And so I need to live like that.
Right.
So before we move to hearing emotion, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was thinking out loud, leaning on the Spirit to give us that gift when we lack it.
Right.
Because that's...
And we're going to talk about that, how to get there.
Yeah.
In just a second. So remember, recognizing, understanding, and communicating sadness leads to joy. This has been a message we've said throughout each of these things, that when you recognize, understand, and communicate your sadness or your anger or your fear, that it leads to the opposite. So it leads to joy. But for all who don't trust that yet, let's just hear you go. Very truly, I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy. A woman giving birth to a child has pain because of her time has come. But when her baby is born, she forgets the anguish because of her joy that a child is born into the world. Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. So we have to seek it. We have to ask it. Hearing God's emotion.
All right. So now we're going to do hearing God's emotion. I'm going to not cover all of the stuff in there because I'm going to go through. So that book that I told you I was reading, Whisper. So, and y'all are now knowing how slow I read because I'm still reading the same book.
Slow
But-
readers right here. These two.
We're just slow, but we are reading. But what I wanted to point out, we were talking about joy and kind of how we were going to introduce it and approach how we were introducing it. And I was in this book and I was getting to the next section and it was called Pure Delight. And so Brian left the room and I just kind of went back to reading it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. It's talking about joy. It really stood out. And so it starts out by saying we see joy in Genesis. And we've already touched on this a couple times actually in this Bible class. When God creates the world. So it's known as the first emotion. And a lot of people say that it's the first emotion in the Bible. And it's joy, it's delight. He's pleased with what he's doing. He's pleased with his creation. And it goes through, it's all in Genesis 1. So I'm not going to talk about all of them. You can kind of go down. And then the next thing that I wanted to point out that he also had, that Batterson had in his book was, this is the Westminster Shorter Catechism. And I looked that up to make sure I was okay with it because I don't know a lot of those words, so I was all right with it. But it says man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. And well, we all know that our job is to glorify God, but I think that Mark Batterson, the author, points out what he points out in the book is the second part is not as embraced. Like, when do we really talk about, oh, I'm enjoying talking about God? Like, I know I'm supposed to. And Becca, like you said, I know I'm supposed to have joy and I know I'm supposed to experience joy, but it's hard when you're not feeling it. So how much do you enjoy God, enjoy his word, enjoy his presence? I lost my place. So how much you enjoy God will give you an idea of your spiritual maturity. And that's what Batterson said. So I'm not saying I made that up, but when I read that, I was like, that was really powerful for me. And not to be an end of one study or anything, but the more I really started reading the Bible and the more I spent time in the gospel, the more I just started learning. I actually, Kelly, what you said a minute ago about the freedom to worship and talking about guilt and going back and forth, I was like, wow. Whenever I step away and I don't have time to read as much as I wanted, I don't beat myself up or get mad at myself anymore. Yeah. I'm enjoying my worship when I have it, but I'm also enjoying that worship when I can't have it. And so I'm actually got this freedom to worship and this freedom to just think about God. And I don't feel guilty that I didn't spend time with him in the morning. And like yesterday, I read Whisper instead of my little Bible verses because I wanted to read that book. And this is what I found in it. But I didn't feel guilty because I didn't read that part of my Bible. I had joy because I was enjoying his presence. I was enjoying his word and I was enjoying God. And I mean, I remember when I was younger going to sermons and going, how long does this sermon last? And now I sit in sermons and I'm like, well, I can't wait to sit in sermons again, like in person, but I'm like, I just want to hear the next thing because I'm just enjoying it. I don't feel guilty. So I think those do go hand in hand. That was the neat aha I just had a little while ago. But the freedom to worship is the more you've spent time with him, the more your guilt goes away and you have freedom. Right. So that was fun to figure out. So is that me?
That's you still.
So the goal for us should be to instinctively and or habitually. I say instinctively for people who maybe just can be that way and it's in their system better. Maybe for adults, I know our kids still drag their feet to the table in the morning to do their Bible study and then later say they like it. But or habitually, get a habit to feel joy when thinking of God and the Bible. And that should be our goal is to instinctively feel joy when we think of the Bible and God. And then that brought up the most important commandment, which is all about love, right? Did we put it on there?
No.
Oh.
Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, right? And what we're talking about is an emotion. Something that we're talking about is your mind, but this joy is something that's in our heart, deep in our heart. Deep in our heart. It's part of our soul, right? So this joy is loving God is joyful. Loving your neighbor, because it's like the first, is an act of joy.
Mm-hmm. So we also, like we keep coming back to, we must go through struggles and sadness to get to joy. When we seek forgiveness and we find grace, that leads us to joy. And the only moment that I could think of where it was just joy was having a baby. Like, that's the most positive wing in the hospital. It's the wing where people go on purpose and want to be there, and everybody's happy, and there are balloons, and that there is a joy there. There's some birthing stuff going on. They're in pain. You have that kind of physical pain, of course we know, but that's just pure joy. So when you talked about Elizabeth and Mary and John the Baptist leaping in her, leaping in her,
joy.
leaping for joy, that's just so beautiful. And I was like, oh, Sarah found it. There's that one in there where that's what it is. But the ones that I looked up typically had something happen before that was not joyful, or a storm came afterwards that is not joyful. So joy, the feeling on the external can be fleeting, but if we have that spiritual depth and that bank full, then it can stay through the storm.
When I heard this definition of God being pleased and his first expression of emotion, that changed how I think about joy. God is joy. His creation is joy. We are joy. So rejoice and be glad in it. Wait, that's another children's song. See, I was ready for y'all too. But that's redundant. So glad and rejoice, I don't know. So there's a great song that I've been listening to is Shane and Shane. They wrote an album called Psalms. And so as I listened to one of the songs, it brought me to the Bible, and I found Psalm 16:11. In your presence is fullness of joy. In your presence. So when we are spending that time, as Susan was saying, when we spend that time looking at God, when we spend that time thinking about God, when we're in the Bible, when we're praying, that is in the presence of God, and that is a fullness of joy. So like you guys, I struggled to find the right example. Y'all were much better than me. Susan wouldn't allow me to Google or look in my concordance to talk about joy with you guys today. She's like, you do that too much and you need to get creative. And so here's Brian's creativity is about to come forward. But then I did Google anyway, because I mean, we can all go do that. So I wanted to share that we can, because I started thinking of the song, My Joy Comes in the Morning, right? Psalm 30. Weeping may stay for the night, but joy comes in the morning. Proverbs 12:20, but those who promote peace have joy. And we'll talk about peace next week. James 1:2, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. And I thought this was great too, when we think about what we've already talked about. When we're facing trials, we should be in the presence of God, talking about our sadness and our fear of that trial, and then we're in his presence, and then we will find joy because we're in his presence. It's wonderful. But so the story I came up with, I think it was Becca, she landed it right where I was, because Jesus gives us the most exuberant and outward story of joy for us to remember, and that is the prodigal son. So I'm going to read it real quickly because we're running short on time here. I got to read this. It's getting late. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. Now listen for all the emotions here. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son. Remember, compassion is empathy plus action. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, this is some excitement here. Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him, put a ring on his finger and the sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, so they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called out to the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come home, he replied, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home and you kill the fatted calf for him. My son, the father says, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Wow. All of those emotions, so many everywhere. It was great. I hope y'all were as excited as I was. So, who are our characters in this little story that Jesus tells? Well, we've got the oldest son. We've got the youngest son. I totally relate to the oldest, by the way. And then we've got the father. So, let's talk about the order of the emotions that get expressed in here. First of all, we've got sadness. Who brings the sadness? Youngest son, right? He is in despair. He feels lonely. He feels ashamed. He's expressed that. My father is going to think of me, right? Then we get joy. Joy comes right from a distance, and the father runs out to find him, runs out, kisses him, embraces him, brings everything to honor the return of his youngest son. Anger. Now we get anger, and who brings that? That would be me, oldest son, right? What the heck is going on in here? So this anger is really, if we want to think about it, this is not, as we've talked about anger, it's not just anger, there's something deeper. And this deeper part is hurt and disappointment. He's feeling left out. He's out there still working and the party's already started. Much less it's for this guy who goes off, younger brother who doesn't really respect anything. See, yeah, this is the oldest coming out in me. So I totally relate with this. This anger is what comes out, but that's not really the problem. But he does express it to his father because we get joy again. And that's reminded by the father that we have to celebrate and be glad because of this return. So this story is called the story of the lost son or the prodigal son. But who is the main character?
Anybody? Who's the main character?
Their father, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The father, right? And this is a parable. So we know that it is God, the Father. The Father, this is a story of us coming back to God, coming to understand Him and how much God has joy when we return to Him, when we come to Him. Whether it's we went out and spent too much time on Facebook or YouTube looking at silly things, and then we come back to prayer and look for Him, God runs out to us, puts a ring on our finger and says, this is mine. You guys, where's the feast? And let's celebrate. When we recognize our sadness and we come back to Him, this is the point of joy. We need to be like God and express joy the same way. We need to express our joy. There's so many different references to rejoicing and giving praise to God, and God certainly loves that. But when we bring our sadness and our anger to Him, He reaches out to us with joy. And that's the same thing that we need to do with others. When we hear anger, when we hear sadness, we reach out with joy as a way to respond to it. It's the thing that we need to do with other people when we hear it, and it's the thing we need to look for in other people. Joy is a great emotion. It's the opposite of sadness, and it is the thing that takes away sadness for those moments that we need it. It's not a permanent fixture, again, we're human and we're going to get horizontal every once in a while. But every time we get vertical, we have to find the joy.
Well, because God is joy, and man is made in God's image. So God actually wants us to have joy and be joy. And when we come together with God, we will have joy. So that's the ultimate goal. But we're human, so we're going to keep falling.
Right.
And then keep going back. So
We are right at about time.
we were
So
close.
we were
11 minutes.
We were 11 minutes short of our goal.
What our goal
But
was.
you guys talked so
Thank
much. This
you.
was so great too.
Yeah.
So we just want to, if you have to leave, we understand, but we're going to keep talking right now and see if there's any other questions or thoughts about joy that we'd like to share and help understand, or you want to share with us, because we want to learn from you too. We covered it all.
We covered all of it.
That's
like
amazing.
no one has a question.
They're basking in joy. Like,
Did the discussion, the gallery view help with, okay, thank you. Yes, that was so much more fun. I'm sorry, you cut me off, I was doing a lot, but I was thinking everyone's discussing and engaging, so it was okay if we went straight up to the 8 o'clock, I thought. But we'll try. We got 2 more weeks to get it down. Then we'll start all over.
Then you can discuss all you want when we're not here.
That's
So
right. Yep. Well, thank you for being in our class tonight and talking.
next week, peace. So go in peace and
Come back in peace.
come back in peace. So hopefully, right?
We'll be back in 2 and 2. Bye.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you
Bye,
guys.
thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great rest of